Hello guys, today we'll be covering a 2022 drama miniseries called The Dropout. Elizabeth Holmes is a 19-year-old Stanford dropout who starts a company called Theranos. Single-handedly, she fooled investors, doctors, and even journalists into thinking that her company was going to revolutionize the diagnosis of diseases forever. But things were not always like this. To know how it all began, let's go back to a few years earlier. Elizabeth is in high school when she finds out that the company her father works for has collapsed after being discovered to be a scam. Her father seeks financial help from his friends, Richard and Lorraine, who just sold a $50 million medical training company. Despite his dislike for Elizabeth's attitude towards him, they decide to help him anyway. Elizabeth has been accepted at Stanford and plans to spend the summer before starting at the university. There, she meets Sunny Balwani, who founded and sold a software company for $40 million. Even though he's twice her age, they get quite close by the end of the summer, but the connection remains platonic. And later, even when Elizabeth is at Stanford, they stay in touch with each other. One day, Elizabeth requests that Dr. Channing Robertson allow her to join a graduate-level research group. He becomes hesitant and tells her to enjoy her freshman year. But when Elizabeth finds a solution to one of his projects, he accepts her into the group. At the start of her sophomore year, Elizabeth submits to Dr. Robertson an idea for a patch that can distribute medications and monitor patients simultaneously in the comfort of their own homes. When she asks him to invest in it, Dr. Robertson puts her in touch with a well-known physician called Phyllis Gardner. But she ends up dismissing her proposal immediately, claiming that the invention will never work. She even advises Elizabeth that she should not try to skip any steps in order to achieve her ambitions, and that for now, she should just try to be 19. One evening, Elizabeth goes to a party to have fun for a night. But the next morning, she curls up in bed while her roommates gossip that Elizabeth claims to have been sexually assaulted last night. Sonny calls her while she's in bed and tells her he misses her. But Elizabeth shuts him down, saying it's creepy for him to talk to her like that, and tells him never to contact her again. Elizabeth files a police report against her assaulter, but the authorities inform her that she does not have sufficient proof to file the case. However, her mother consoles her by telling her that she believes in her. She tells Elizabeth that men will try to take from her many times in her life, but she should not let that bother her, even though it might be tough. Next, Elizabeth decides to move forward in life and returns with the concept of a blood testing device to make healthcare more accessible. And in this way, Theranos was born. She asks her parents to invest in the company, stating that she'll be dropping out of Stanford and that her tuition money can be used to fund the company instead. One day, a stray bullet hits Elizabeth's car outside her office and she's nearly shot. In a state of panic, she calls Sonny, who arrives to find her crying on the office floor. At that moment, Sonny promises that he'll always protect her, and before they know it, they embrace in a kiss. In the next scene, Elizabeth has hired a few experts, including Edmund Koo, Rakesh Madhava, and chemist Ian Gibbons. This team is working on developing a machine for her idea, the RDX Metabolic Profiler. After many days of intense work, they test the machine's first prototype, but unfortunately, it malfunctions, and the power goes out due to being late with the electric bill. Meanwhile, Elizabeth is in financial distress and seeks advice from Robertson. But when the professor advises her that she needs new investors, she gladly starts pitching the idea to half of Silicon Valley. However, her lack of a university education turns off potential investors, who almost all dismiss her. One day, a millionaire named Don Lucas shows up unannounced at her office and demands to see the working prototype. When Elizabeth tells him that the prototype is not yet ready, he prepares to leave. But she stops him and delivers a moving speech about how the blood testing industry is run by large corporations looking to make a profit. Furthermore, Elizabeth assures him that this company will be able to help the public by giving them more freedom and insight into their healthcare. Lucas is very impressed by her presentation and wants her to meet Larry Ellison, who's the CEO of Oracle Corporation. The next day, Elizabeth gets on a boat to meet Larry, who agrees to secure her a meeting with a pharmaceutical business if she can prepare a prototype. Larry also tells her that, until she can be ruthless and fire people, she would never be a billionaire. Meanwhile, Elizabeth receives a phone call from her mother, who informs her that her father has been hospitalized. She immediately gets off the boat and heads to the hospital, where she discovers that Sonny has taken care of her parents. However, her father advises her that she must return to work as they've invested all of her tuition money in the company, and now she can't look back. When Elizabeth arrives at the office, she finds the staff celebrating Edmund's birthday and shouts at them for not working. She later calls Edmund and informs him that she wants them to work for 24 hours until they have a working prototype. After countless tries, they finally get a reading from a drop of Rakesh's blood, and everyone rejoices since they now have a functional prototype. The team then travels to Switzerland to demonstrate the prototype to Novartis, which is a large pharmaceutical business. But in the hotel room, the machine continues to generate problem warnings. Elizabeth calls Edmund and asks for his help, but no matter how much they try, the machine does not function. Later, she asks Rakesh if they still have the preserved reading from when the machine worked. On the day of the presentation, she fakes the demo by injecting her blood into the machine and presenting the previously saved data. In this way, she manages to secure $165 million in investment from Novartis. At the office, everyone celebrates the success, and Elizabeth gets heavily drunk. Meanwhile, Edmund tests the prototype and finds out that it does not function. He confronts Rakesh about this problem, but Rakesh assures him that no one will find out about it. After some time, when Sunny comes to pick up Elizabeth, she confesses to him that they faked the prototype in Switzerland. Sunny then strictly advises her not to disclose this to anyone else. As the company expands, Elizabeth has brought on board several renowned Apple employees like Anna Ariola and Avi Tavanian, as well as other powerful members. Later, she hears from her mother that her old neighbor Richard is attempting to undermine her business out of bitterness. Elizabeth doesn't give it much thought, but she later discovers that Richard has patented a home blood testing instrument, which she must now buy from him anyhow. In the meantime, Elizabeth continues to mislead her board members and postpones the presentation of the functioning prototype. Avi suspects that the company has not fulfilled its obligations to the Novartis contract, but she lies by telling him that they have a lot of pharmaceutical interest and are participating in a trial with Pfizer on real patients. On the other hand, Elizabeth and Sunny's relationship is crumbling as she's slowly being pushed out of her business world. He decides to look into Theranos while Elizabeth is on a business trip, but he's shocked to discover that she's 10 years away from fulfilling the promises she made to the board members. Later, Elizabeth refuses to drink a green juice that Sunny brought to her, leading to a large dispute and spilling. Next, Elizabeth and Edmund go to Nashville to test the machine on patients, but since it still doesn't work, Edmund becomes hesitant. Dissatisfied with the lack of progress, Elizabeth recruits an outsider named Brendan Morris to design an alternative version of the gadget. When she decides to go forward with this design, disagreement ensues among the team members. As a result, several employees leave the company, and some are fired, including Edmund and Anna. In the meantime, Avi expresses his worries to Don Lucas, saying that Theranos lacks contracts and facts to support Elizabeth's claims. Don, on the other hand, insists that he trusts her since she runs the company. He tells Avi that if he's so skeptical, he can resign from the board of directors, which Avi agrees to do. Eventually, the board members begin to notice Elizabeth's incompetence, and Don Lucas calls for a vote of no confidence in Elizabeth as CEO, and thus, the board chooses to remove her as the CEO. However, Elizabeth pleads with the board to let her keep her company and promises to hire an experienced manager, Sunny Balwani, as COO with a $20 million grant. In this way, she persuades the board to keep her as CEO, and at the same time, she can also mend her volatile relationship with Sunny. A few months later, Elizabeth goes to Walgreens headquarters with Sunny, the new COO, to negotiate a deal to introduce Theranos into their stores. Dr. Rosen is the Walgreens medical director who greets them when they arrive for their pitch. Elizabeth's charisma and flattery impress him, but they must persuade Walgreens CFO, Wade Miquelon, who's assigned his lab specialist Kevin Hunter to investigate Theranos' laboratories. Because the machines are still dysfunctional, Elizabeth and Sunny do everything they can to keep them away from the lab. She constructs a story about how she's hesitant to show Kevin her lab because he previously worked for Quest Diagnostics, and they may try to copy her. However, Wade also states that they'll not proceed with the deal until they have access to the lab. On the other hand, Ian Gibbons, Theranos' head chemist, learns about Project Beta and goes to meet Channing Robertson, an old friend and a board member. He informs Robertson that they're not even close to completing the machine and that they're endangering the lives of people. Later, when Robertson informs Elizabeth about Ian's findings, she immediately fires Ian for talking behind her back. However, the rest of the lab team threatens to quit in Ian's absence, so Sunny brings him back, but in a much smaller position. Meanwhile, the conflict of interest between Walgreens and Theranos is growing, as they've been refusing to show them the lab. Elizabeth tells Wade that they're not desperate for a deal because they're also talking with Stephen Bird, the CEO of a retail company called Safeway. The following day, both Walgreens and Safeway arrive at Theranos, and Elizabeth informs Wade that she's decided not to continue with the deal. Walgreens believes that she may have gone forward with Safeway, but they later find out that she has refused them as well. Elizabeth and Sunny come from the office discussing a flight to Boston. Seeing this, they believe that Theranos may be making a deal with CVS Pharmacy in Boston, which is their main competitor. They both agree that Elizabeth may be bluffing about the CVS Pharmacy, but they can't take the chance if it's true. So even without inspecting the lab or the working prototype, Walgreens and Safeway agree to the deal with Theranos. Fast forward to 3 years, and Walgreens has grown irritated by the machine's regular failures and delays. And as always, Elizabeth stalls the questioning, stimulating reality with empty promises and clever words. However, Wade sets a strict 6-month timeline for Elizabeth to complete the first wellness centers, or the deal will be terminated. On the other hand, Elizabeth is suing Richard to have his patent revoked, which compels Theranos to buy his invention for a remote blood test. They're both too proud to give up the fight, and finally, Richard comes up with an idea. He goes through Theranos' patient records and discovers that Ian Gibbons' name appears on almost all of them, so he mails Ian with a subpoena. Meanwhile, Ian is becoming increasingly depressed after working at a desk for 3 years, unable to do the chemistry work he's supposed to. When he receives the subpoena, he becomes scared and consults with Theranos' legal advisor. Ian wants to tell the truth, but he's scared of being sued by Theranos. But at the same time, he also does not want to lie, since he does not want innocent people to suffer. Next, Sunny is irritated that Elizabeth agreed to a September deadline, while they're still far from having a functioning machine. He says to her that she's avoiding responsibility and that she should concentrate on the machine rather than marketing. Later, a prominent board member, George Schultz, introduces his grandson Tyler to Elizabeth. Tyler is a big fan of Elizabeth and wants to work for Theranos as an intern. Back at the lab, Sunny recommends dismantling another company's product, a Siemens machine. By doing so, he believes that they can learn how to improve their device, but Elizabeth refuses. Later, realizing that they have no other choice, she informs Sunny that they'll launch in stages, with Phase 1 utilizing a reconfiguration of the Siemens machine. In the meantime, Elizabeth has hired a well-known lawyer named David Boyes to represent her in her case against Richard. On the other side, Ian is becoming increasingly frustrated as Theranos' legal counsel, Linda, drafts a letter claiming that he's unwell. She also mentioned that Ian has a drinking problem and asks him to sign it to keep him out of court proceedings. He understands that signing the form means he'll be unable to apply for other jobs and that his reputation will be damaged. When Ian's wife wakes up the next morning and looks for him, she finds him dead on the bathroom floor. When Elizabeth hears of Ian's death, she appears to be upset initially, as she feels she's somehow responsible for his death. However, she's relieved to find that Ian's death has effectively won them the case against Richard Fuse, as he can no longer testify. Later, Theranos security arrives at Ian's house to retrieve all of his work-related stuff, while his wife watches in terror. In the next scene, Elizabeth gives a speech to announce that their new machine will be released at Walgreens in 48 hours. Meanwhile, the new intern Tyler steps in to begin his first day, and Mark, the new lab director, welcomes him. Since Ian is no longer alive to testify, David offers to dismiss the lawsuit against Richard if he drops the patent. Richard reluctantly agrees, but he tells David that he will find what she's hiding and expose her to the world. After that, he contacts Dr. Phyllis Gardner of Stanford University to inquire about Elizabeth, to which she responds that Elizabeth has always been a fraud. It's now 2013, and Elizabeth has hired the renowned documentarian Errol Morris to film advertising for Theranos. Walgreens is now using Theranos' machines, totally unaware of their faults. Meanwhile, Richard is still enraged and is trying everything he can to bring Elizabeth down. He contacts Wall Street Journal reporter John Carreyrou and informs him that the entire Theranos company is a fraud. But John replies that he needs a better source and stronger evidence to make this claim. Later, Richard and Dr. Phyllis go to Ian's residence to speak with his wife Rochelle. There, Rochelle confesses that Ian kept mentioning how Elizabeth had not invented anything, and yet her name is still on the patents as an inventor. The three of them call John again, but he says that he'll need more concrete proof because there's no written record of Ian's words. Afterward, Richard tries to reach out to people on LinkedIn in the hopes that someone from Theranos will come and speak. In the next scene, Erica Chung, who's a big fan of Elizabeth, begins her internship at Theranos. She's partnered up with Tyler in the lab, where she notices that the lab is divided into two sections, one for actual tests and the other for trial tests. She becomes puzzled and asks her superior, Dr. Mark, about this. but he immediately changes the topic to avoid any further troubles. Later, Tyler reveals to her that there's a hidden lab called Normandy, where the actual tests take place. A few days later, Erica is transferred to Normandy, where actual tests are conducted. One evening, while she's working alone, Erica realizes that the test results of live patients are being manipulated, and there's a Theranos sticker put over every Siemens machine. Some blood tests are diluted and tested on the Siemens machine, while those tested on Theranos' machine are manually adjusted even when the results are incorrect. She notifies Tyler about the incident, but he finds it difficult to believe Elizabeth would purposefully do something like that. However, he assures Erica that he'll take this matter to his grandfather. Later, at Elizabeth's 30th birthday party, when Tyler asks her if she's doing tests on Siemens equipment, she simply replies that she has no idea what he's talking about. He goes to meet Erica and tells her that she's right about everything. Then they write an email to Elizabeth exposing the lab's mismanagement, so she won't be able to claim that she wasn't aware. Before sending, Tyler signs the email with his name so that Erica won't get into trouble. The next morning, Sonny calls Erica and Tyler to his office and instantly fires Tyler. Then he threatens Erica, saying that he knows she was behind this, and that if anything like this happens again, he would make sure she can never work anywhere. Woefully confused, Erica and Tyler go to see George Schultz to inform him of the issue. But since he blindly trusts Elizabeth, George refuses to support them. Later, Richard arranges a secret meeting with Mark, a Theranos lab director. Mark says that he will not be a whistleblower, but he can confirm a few details and direct him in the right direction. On the other hand, John sees a ray of hope when Erica and Tyler call him. The next scene takes us to 2015, where Elizabeth is living her luxurious life, interviewing presidents, doing a time profile, and being followed around by a security team. However, journalist John Carreyrou is still investigating the Theranos story and speaking with doctors and patients who have used their equipment. He now has several sources prepared to testify. His boss, Judith, asks him to send a questionnaire to Theranos so that when the moment arises, they can claim that they gave the company an equal chance to present its case. Meanwhile, Elizabeth and Sonny consult with their lawyer, David Boyes. They refuse to answer the journal's questions, so Boyes proposes they go after John's sources. Sonny then threatens the doctors who are supposed to testify against Theranos, and he demands that everyone sign non-disclosure agreements. On the other hand, as instructed by John, Mark downloads hundreds of corporate emails to his personal drive, but being scared that the company might sue him, he deletes all the emails at the last moment. John is hoping Tyler will speak with the journal on the record, but he's not received the call yet. To make matters worse, Rupert Murdoch, the billionaire who owns the Wall Street Journal, has invested $125 million in Theranos, which makes it pretty much impossible to expose Theranos. In the next scene, Tyler speaks with his grandfather, who invites him to his home to deal with the Theranos issue so that Tyler will not be sued. When he arrives, he discovers that Theranos' legal representative, Linda, is already present. After some discussion, Linda and George want Tyler to sign another non-disclosure agreement, but he refuses. Linda warns him that if he does not do as he's told, Theranos will file many lawsuits against him. Meanwhile, David Boyes and his legal team visit the Wall Street Journal's office. However, the unexpected happens when David accidentally confesses that Theranos uses third-party analyzers. The statement turns out to be the final piece of the puzzle, and the article comes together. Later that evening, Elizabeth attends a function for the Harvard Medical School Board of Fellows and meets Dr. Phyllis, who's also a board member. She goes on to say how honored she is to be on the same board as Dr. Phyllis, but Phyllis responds by saying that she's looking forward to the Wall Street Journal's article. Sometime later, John finally exposes Theranos' fraud in the Wall Street Journal, and the news spreads like wildfire throughout the media and the general public. Meanwhile, Elizabeth gathers her employees and declares that the story is unreliable and that they'll cooperate in disproving it. The following day, Elizabeth is terrified and calls each board member, claiming that John's article is full of lies and that he's a sexist journalist who can't stand a successful woman. Sonny, on the other hand, tries to keep Walgreens from canceling its contract with Theranos. Despite the article, Elizabeth has managed to retain board members, and none of them have resigned or stopped supporting her. On the other hand, Elizabeth and Sonny, fearful of losing everything, begin to blame and threaten each other for the company's problems. In the next scene, Erica decides to file an official complaint to CMS, which has the authority to shut down the Theranos labs. Later, Tyler pays a visit to his grandfather and convinces him to speak against Elizabeth, believing that doing so will be a significant step in uncovering the truth. George, on the other hand, refuses to believe him and asks him to leave. Next, a CMS inspector named Gary arrives to investigate Theranos' labs, but Sonny tries to stall and manipulate him. However, Gary completes the report in February 2016, requiring all Theranos lab operations to stop for 2 years. Elizabeth accuses Sonny of everything and tells the board members that she was completely unaware of what was going on. One morning, Sonny wakes up to find that Elizabeth has attended an early morning board meeting without informing him. It turns out that she informed the board of Sonny's decision to leave the company. Afterward, as she prepares to move out, he screams at her and threatens her, but he understands that exposing her is also his downfall. In the following scene, George goes to John's office and says that he was wrong for slandering his own grandchild. He says that he does not want to be one of the whistleblowers to come out against Theranos, but he does provide the journalist with a statement that publicly respects Tyler's integrity. Elizabeth tries to reduce the damage by giving a lengthy media interview, but her efforts are pointless at this point. Later, we see her at an empty Theranos office, implying that the company is no longer in operation. Sometime later, her former lawyer, Linda, informs her that if she's proven guilty of the claims against her, she might face up to 20 years in prison. But even at this point, Elizabeth claims that she has not done anything wrong and walks away. As the series ends, we find that Elizabeth Holmes was convicted of 4 charges of misrepresenting investors, 3 counts of wire fraud, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. She's still free while awaiting sentencing, but she may face up to 20 years in prison. She's currently residing in California with her husband, Billy Evans, and her son.